Good afternoon and welcome to the Living with Wildfire mini-series put together by the Trinity County Fire Safe Council. My name is Amelia Flights and we are here today with Ricky Satomi of the University of California Cooperative Extension, who is here to talk to us about home hardening.
Hi everyone, my name is Rick Satomi. I am the Forestry Advisor for Shasta, Trinity, and Siskiyou County. Today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about home hardening and tips that you can take to reinforce your home or structure against wildfire. So to get us started, I'd like to review some of the different ways that structures ignite. Generally speaking, there are two different ways that a building can ignite from a wildfire. The first is through direct contact with flame, and the second is through indirect contact through the heat that's generated from the flame. It's helpful to understand these differences when we look at our own homes and try to identify areas that might be in need of repair. When we talk about firebrands, for example, we want to look at areas where embers may penetrate into the home or into the wall of the home and ignite material. With convection ignition sources, we want to look at areas where fuels are accumulating adjacent to the home, or maybe a broom or some structures leaning up against the home that can ignite and transfer heat from that fuel source into the home itself. And with radiation, we want to look at things that are near the home. This can be piles of firewood, it might be a lawn chair that's made out of wood that can catch easily from embers and then transmit that heat through the air into the home itself. So to see how this process works, you can see how the ember storm here is slowly accumulating more and more heat into that inside corner of the house, where it eventually ignites the lawn in front of it and will start to generate a heat source right next to the house itself. Here's another angle of that same video, and you can see how big of an impact the different structures of the house itself have on the acceleration of that fire. With the way the deck is positioned and where that trellis is positioned, they present really easily accessible fuels that the lawn that was ignited earlier can build up into and then start creating a heat source that is directly attached to the house. Modifying your home to address structural vulnerabilities can seem like an ambitious challenge at times. There's also the cost and the time component to think about. You never want to be halfway through replacing your tempered glass windows when the spring storm comes through and you end up with 3 inches of snow in your living room. Today I'm going to go over a few home hardening recommendations that can help further reduce your risk. But please keep in mind that you can take these as far as you want. If you can't replace all the vents around your house, for example, start from the ones at the bottom and worry about your attic vents later once you have more time or the weather dries up a little bit more. When hardening homes, I always like to start by prioritizing the areas that need the most amount of work. To do this, I like to take a walk around the house and just look for areas where there's signs of damage or where there's signs of a lot of debris accumulating. The thing that's important to remember is that wherever trash or needles or leaves can blow in, so can embers and so can flaming pieces of debris during a wildfire. If you don't have a giant pile of needles leaning up against the side of your house and the rest of it is in relatively good condition, the next thing to look at are any inside corners. These are areas where the wind can become still and debris can easily blow in and get trapped. Unfortunately, there's not really a good way to modify your house to reduce these areas other than redesigning the shape of your house. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to go through and make sure they're well maintained year to year. And one final thing to look for are any areas where debris is accumulating next to a weak point. You can see here on this photo on the bottom left, there's a little bit of green material right underneath the siding. That siding is actually doing okay because it's adequately spaced off the ground. But if it were down low to the ground, or if there was a crack or an issue with that siding, that presents an entry point where fire can actually penetrate into the home. Another way to look for vulnerabilities is to look for water damage on the house. If water can penetrate into the house, it'll oftentimes create a soft spot where rot can occur, or the wood itself is weakened and more susceptible to ignition from embers. In addition, any gaps between the siding or your decking or just between boards along your wall create an opportunity for debris to get trapped and once again be easily ignited by ember attack. You might notice how a lot of the vulnerabilities we're talking about today relate to debris accumulation and ember impact on the home. The reason for this is that during a wildfire, the actual time in which the active fire is directly impacting the home is actually quite low compared to when embers are assaulting the home, either during the pre-fire front or during the post-fire front. For this reason, we're not trying to make homes non-combustible, but instead we're trying to make sure that the embers hitting the home have a lower chance of igniting it. So I'll share some upgrades that you can use to reduce your home's risk from wildfire. The first one is vents. From a lot of the research that we've seen over the years, by upgrading the type of mesh you have on your vent, you can actually increase the number of embers that are caught and block them from entering your home. This obviously doesn't apply equally to all vents. With a dryer vent, for example, because there is still a mesh screen there and you have a lot of lint behind it, we actually recommend getting a flap style vent. That way it'll completely shut itself off when the dryer's not running, and so if there's a wildfire coming, the embers won't be able to penetrate that solid flap. If you're willing to spend more money, there are other vent designs that can be used. On the top left, for example, there's a Vulcan vent design which uses intumescent paint that actually expands when it's exposed to high heat. This means that when a fire is approaching, the vent itself will actually close off all of the openings, and so embers can't penetrate it. These vents are a one-time use vent, so you will have to replace them after they're exposed to fire, but they are very effective at blocking embers from passing through the vent into your attic or your garage space. Other vent designs include the steel wool mesh approach there on the bottom left, or baffling system, which basically creates a series of channels that an ember has to pass through, making it more difficult for the ember to physically move from outside of the house into the interior cavity behind the vent. Windows are another vulnerable part of the home that can be reinforced. When a window is exposed to fire, the glass in the middle of the window actually expands more quickly than the glass behind the wooden framing holding it in place. This difference in thermal expansion is actually what causes the glass to crack. Installing tempered glass or dual pane windows can help drastically reduce the chances of ember entry during fire. Typically, the point of failure with the window is with the glass itself. Once the glass breaks, if a large piece of it will fall out of the window, it creates an opening in the glass itself. With dual pane windows, it's less likely that both windows will shatter in the same way. And with tempered glass, the heating point is actually so high that it's unlikely that fire alone will break the glass. One thing that's come up a little bit more recently is whether or not vinyl windows can be used. Vinyl windows are fine to use as long as there's a metal shim holding the glass in place. Because vinyl does melt when exposed to fire, you can actually lose integrity on the frame of a vinyl window. But as long as there's a piece of metal inside the frame holding the glass in place, it'll still retain the integrity of the glass and keep embers from penetrating through it. Another way to improve your home's hardiness to wildfire is upgrading the siding. Fully replacing the siding of your house can be a pretty costly endeavor, but as with vents and other modifications, you can do this piecemeal as well. You can see here in the example that the homeowner actually replaced the bottom half of the house with metal siding to make sure that there was no combustible material at all below the snow line there. This particular homeowner did end up replacing the wooden siding with hardy board as well, since he had the entire wall down.
but this is definitely something that you can do in stages or piecemeal if you don't have the time to do the full upgrade like you see here. It's worth noting that none of these home modifications happen in an isolated space. In addition to the siding modifications and the upgrade to a different vent design that you can see, you'll notice how the homeowner actually moved the landscaping out as well. By integrating the 5-foot non-combustible zone with home hardening modifications, the two pieces can actually work in tandem to further increase your home's resistance to wildfire. Moving the tree further out means that there's less litter drop directly adjacent to the home, which means lower maintenance costs for the landowner. In addition, that tree is no longer positioned directly in front of that window, so that if there is a fire, there isn't a flame source that is directly impacting that particular window. A final suggestion to leave with you, and this is actually something that I need to work on myself this summer, is to ensure that the non-combustible zone wraps around the entirety of your house. By replacing the 5 feet of fence line closest to your house, you can actually ensure that there's no direct pathway for fire to move from a wooden fence into your home structure. You can do this with a metal fence or vinyl fence, anything of that sort. And the benefit of this is you can actually keep part of your wooden fence and retain that privacy benefit while also reducing the fire risk to your house.
Thank you for joining us today with our Living with Wildfire mini-series. Keep checking back through the end of March to continue to receive great input for how to improve your home hardening, as well as your defensible space and what opportunities are available to you throughout Trinity County. Hope you have a great day.